The Bogosity Podcast, early and ad-free. Become a subscriber at Patreon, Subscribestar, or Discord. Use the links at donate.bogosity.tv.
Welcome to the Bogosity Podcast for the week of June 14, 2026. The podcast that twists again like we did last summer. This is your host, Shane Killian. Let's borate the news of the bogus. One of the AI cases we've covered is Thomson Reuters v. Ross, which isn't about a generative AI, but one that's basically a natural language search engine for legal opinions. Thomson Reuters sued because Ross used Westlaw headnotes in their training data. The judge famously ruled against Ross, who appealed to the Third Circuit, and now, after some filings and a lot of amicus briefs, finally went to oral arguments, which were broadcast to the public. Supposedly. Your humble host tried to go directly to the source by watching the live stream of the oral arguments. Unfortunately, the gods of internet routing weren't smiling on him. For hours, I made attempt after attempt to load the live stream, only to be greeted by the familiar spinning wheel, YouTube never actually sending me the video. Then, the whole thing got marked as private. So, sadly, I'm left with reports from others who were either there or had special dispensation from YouTube to actually use their bloody site. Yeah, I'm salty about it. Sorry. So if we do eventually get a public video, I'll cover it on my channel. Until then, let's start with what Courthouse News had to say about it. Ross's lawyer, Mark S. Davies, argued to the panel, "What we have taught this machine now is how to think like a lawyer. Like, you get the question, you go find it. It's spectacularly transformational. And we took so little. We took just 0.08% is all we copied of 28 million headnotes. This is a legal context. It's not something that is creative. It's not poetry. It's not like the creative works that are going on in the other district court cases." Feist v. Rule came up, where the Supreme Court had to rule against a company that sued someone else for copying the phone book. No, I'm not kidding. The court said that there didn't have to be much creativity, but there did have to be some. Purely factual information cannot be copyrighted. That seems one way for Ross to win without there being this enormous precedent for other AI cases. Since Westlaw is just reporting facts and legal opinions, there's no valid copyright to begin with. Thomson Reuters had tried to bring bad faith into it, but Davies pointed out, copyright is not a privilege reserved for the well-behaved. Arguing for the other side, Dale Sindali said, quote, "The law draws a distinction between things that are the work of people writing about the law and the law itself." She was trying to make the case that Westlaw's headnotes, even though they're just quotes from legal opinions, were just creative enough to count. She also hammered the point we're hearing a lot in the other AI cases, that if the product merely competes with them, they lose fair use at the fourth factor. Quote, "The law draws a distinction between things that are the work of people writing about law and the law itself. They're selling the same product that does the same thing, and there's nothing transformative about it. They had the cases, their own experts admitted that they could have done their own analysis themselves and come up with questions and question pairs to do the same thing. They didn't need to copy us, they just wanted to." We also have some good information from Adam Eisgrau, who live-tweeted the arguments. As in their brief, Ross argued that the Upcodes case supports them, and the lower court's ruling should be reversed on that basis. No one can own the law or facts about the law. Ross's counsel, presumably Davies, brought up the circularity argument regarding the fourth factor that the Supreme Court pointed out. There's no market for AI training in headnotes because West's headnotes were used in a novel way. It would be circular to call that a basis for establishing a market. And anyway, copyright isn't about protecting markets, only expression. Factor 1 is critical here. If something is transformative enough, it's a completely new expression and nothing else matters. Sindali had claimed that West Search was an AI-based algorithm and called Ross a latecomer to the scene. But Ross pointed out that West Search was released in 2011, made before the Transformers technology that makes modern neural nets possible. Not all AIs are alike. What Ross does is, quote, much more precise. One of the judges apparently pointed out that West editors are supposed to clean up the opinion to remove anything creative, because creative means inaccurate. Also, I'd love to hear the full argument on this. Davies argued that since the copyright statute came after the common law with such spectacular transformation, no copyright law should be able to touch it. Sindali said that Ross could have done everything on their own without Westlaw, and that means there's no justification for what they did. Also, apparently the only part of Factor 1 that matters is commerciality. They immediately lose on that. I guess to her, transformativeness isn't a thing. The judges kept rejecting the idea that hard work put into something was a factor. She tried to say the burden was on Ross to show that there was no harm to West's market, but Davies pointed out that Ross is not in any position to show that evidence, pointing again to upcodes. Davies also said that Sindali's claim that they didn't have to scrape headnotes has nothing to do with fair use. One judge said, apparently with a bit of edge, that this sounds like it's about competition, not public policy. So it seems like we have the two big points here. Either there's no creativity in Westlaw's headnotes, in which case there's no copyright and therefore there can be no infringement, or there is, in which case it's going to hinge on how much they weigh Factor 4 and if they believe Ross is transformative enough to overcome it. And, of course, if mere competition is enough to derail Factor 4. That seems to be the only point that could potentially affect other AI cases. So we'll have to see how the Third Circuit rules, and afterwards if the losing party is going to take it up to SCOTUS. Until then, I'll keep you posted if they ever manage to post the original arguments and they say something more spectacular than what's been reported here. It's just weird that we don't have it. Courts don't usually create a YouTube live stream, broadcast a high-profile argument, mark the docket, post video yes, and then intentionally bury the recording without explanation. But with arguments totaling almost an hour, I think it's clear we haven't got the whole picture. I'll let you know.
Presenting the greatest game this side of Yuggoth. You are H.P. Lovecraft's cat, and your name is Nick. Right, we can't say that on a podcast. Well, anyway, that's the point. Your name is a joke, so now you are out for revenge. You become the Necronomicat. Using the Necronomicon, you come to the present day to buy a cat. That's a gun. For a cat. It's a fat cat. But the Necronomicon is treacherous, and it let in Lovecraft's monsters. Now, in a crumbling world, you must fight. Build your team, buy guns and armor, buy items of dubious legality, defeat the bosses of each level, then take Lovecraft down. Play Necronomicat. The link is at cat.bogosity.tv. Yeah, we're doing cat.bogosity.tv, not that other one. What, you want me to get kicked off the internet or something?
So we have a Supreme Court ruling in FCC v. AT&T, where the court 8-1 said that the FCC can fine AT&T and Verizon for spying on customer location data, selling access to that data, and not telling their customers about it. We've talked before about how police, stalkers, and even the prison system have been abusing this warrantless system. Efforts to stop it were derailed last year by the Fifth Circuit, saying that the FCC fines somehow violated AT&T's Seventh Amendment rights and that the FCC can only do this with a jury trial. John Roberts, writing for the court, said that's not the case because the FCC isn't a court and can't actually enforce their fines. He supported a contradictory finding by the Second Circuit, which pointed out that the actual process is for the FCC to issue a fine, and if the company doesn't pay, then you take them to court, and that must be a trial de novo. Roberts wrote, Absent a successful enforcement suit and resulting court order, the statute provides no other mechanism for the Commission to collect the forfeiture. The regulated party may, of course, pay the forfeiture voluntarily, but until it does, or the court in a Section 504 enforcement action orders payment, the Commission may not use the notice of apparent liability to the prejudice of the party in other Commission proceedings. Which does mean that FCC fines aren't conclusive, and the FCC can't resolve the obligations on their own. They just say, you owe us. If you don't agree, they take you to court and you argue it out there. And it has no effect on subsequent enforcement. Quote, the statute provides that forfeiture shall be recoverable exclusively in a trial de novo. And trial de novo means a proceeding in which the whole case has gone into as if no trial whatever had been in the initial tribunal. Thus, for the purpose of a Section 504 trial, the only means by which the government can collect a penalty, it is as if the Commission never found any facts at all. Before a regulated party can be made to pay, the jury gets the last word. Clarence Thomas was the lone dissent. He wrote, the Commission now agrees that AT&T and Verizon would have been entitled to a jury trial de novo in an Article III court had they declined to pay. Because its orders were not binding until after that jury trial, the Commission says, AT&T and Verizon in reality paid the Commission voluntarily. The court accepts that account and does not grant the carriers any relief. Because I would give the parties an opportunity to proceed under a correct understanding of the law, I respectfully dissent. Yeah, he never pulls any punches, does he? He doesn't disagree with the court as far as they go. He doesn't say, no, man, the FCC can do whatever they want. In fact, he would go much farther than the court did. An agency cannot produce an enforceable obligation, and you can't validate an agency proceeding by eventually making your way into an Article III court. Thomas basically pointed out that, given the majority's opinion, the FCC's notices were completely misleading. Quote, the orders were structured like judicial opinions. They explained what AT&T and Verizon did, what the law required, and how the law applied to the facts. The orders imposed liability for monetary penalties. In AT&T's case, the ordering clauses said, it is ordered that AT&T Inc. is liable for a monetary forfeiture in the amount of $57,265,625 for willfully and repeatedly violating Section 222 of the Act and Section 64.2010 of the Commission's rules. Verizon's order contained identical language directing it to pay about $47 million. Although the orders stated that AT&T and Verizon could receive a jury trial de novo, they also described payment of the penalty as mandatory based on the Commission's adjudication alone. Payment of the forfeiture shall be made in the manner provided for in Section 1.80 of the Commission's rules within 30 calendar days after the release of this forfeiture's order. That was the Commission asserting it could impose those penalties without a court order. Quote, under protest, AT&T and Verizon both paid the amounts ordered, which was understood to be a precondition to their ability to file petitions for review in federal court. AT&T filed a petition for review in the Fifth Circuit, and Verizon filed one in the Second Circuit. At every stage of their cases, they preserved their position that they should have received an Article III adjudication before being forced to pay. In the orders, the Commission took the position that it could issue the orders not because they were non-binding, but because such orders could be imposed from start to finish without the involvement of Article III courts. The procedure for judicial review of the orders that is the basis for this court's jurisdiction treated them not as requests for voluntary payment, but as final orders. Instead, AT&T and Verizon did what courts ordinarily encourage. They paid under protest and filed suit to get their payments back. Today, the court punishes AT&T and Verizon for complying with a government order that they in good faith believed was obligatory, diligently preserving their objection to that order, and then litigating that objection so effectively as to cause the government to change its position years later. I respectfully dissent. In a footnote to the majority opinion, Roberts made it clear, quote, We express no view on the merits of this argument, what relief may be available to the carriers, or in what proceeding. So by sending these cases back down to the lower courts, it's the lower courts that have to figure it out. As for the rest of his dissent, quote, "We decline to engage in such speculation, particularly in service of an argument that the carriers themselves did not raise." Yeah, it's Roberts. Wimp. If Thomas's approach became law, agencies would have to bring many more enforcement actions directly in federal court rather than in-house proceedings. That would represent a massive contraction of the modern administrative state. The rest of the court, being wimps, wouldn't go that far, but at least it's a step.
I'm brother Ezekiel, and I know how naughty thou hast been. So naughty, thou needst a VPN. Hide thy iniquity from prying eyes, and make sure the liturgical authorities remain ignorant. Take thy browser to vpn.bogosity.tv to get BoxPN. At $6.36 a month, a price only the most penurious would balk at, thou shalt have unlimited high-speed connections to servers all over the globe. And they don't log connections. Thy privacy is assured. That should please you sinners. Just remember, the Lord sees all. When traveling, make it look like thou art still home. At home, ensure the elders at your ISP don't take out their judgment with traffic shaping and DMCA notices. Up to 5 devices can connect at once, almost one for every deadly sin. Keep thy sins private. Go to vpn.bogosity.tv.
There's a big complaint going around about the Artemis 3 mission. Artemis 2 made headlines because they went out beyond the moon, further than any humans have been, and took amazing pictures and had amazing interviews in the process. Artemis 3 is not the mission that will land on the moon. That's Artemis 4. Artemis 3 is a much smaller mission, staying only in low Earth orbit. They'll be practicing docking maneuvers with the lunar module and perhaps EVAs as well. But the complaint isn't about how small the mission is or any other technical or scientific complaints. No, it's the fact that all 4 crew members are male. Yes, this is where we are. NASA Administrator Jared Isaacman faced criticisms in his words, quote, ranging from disappointment to outrage, with one critic saying it was massively upsetting. It's not even a complaint about a sexist selection process. You want to know what the difference is between that and DEI? The Post said it perfectly. Women represent 50% of the population. They deserve at least 1 seat on every mission from a government-run agency. Yep, a quota. Isaacman pushed back, saying that he had, quote, personally been to space twice with 50% female crews. My closest advisors and some of the smartest engineers I know are women. In our latest NASA leadership organization, nearly 50% of the center directors and mission directorate leadership are women. The last astronaut candidate class selected under this administration was majority female, 6 women and 4 men, because they were the best of the best, including one astronaut, Anna Menon, I previously went to space with. Sorry, but for missions like this, you select the best of the best, and nothing else matters. Unless you want things to work out like the Titan submersible. It could be worse. At least they selected a black guy for one of the 4. Can you imagine if they'd all been white? Mission Commander Randy Bresnik said nothing regarding the gender of the crew was intended at all. Quote, you can look at our astronaut office and see the wide diversity within the office, whether that's gender or background or nationality or heritage. And certainly, the boss had to pick the crew for this flight that he had available that had the skill sets that he needed. Among them, the 4 crew members have the diverse range of skill sets necessary to do the low Earth orbit flight tests. Yeah, but what are the chances all 4 would be male? Well, the answer is 1 in 16. It's gonna happen. Of course, it was CNN who called attention to this and set the Twitterati against them. Astro Alexandra posted, not a single woman flying on Artemis 3 is an insane choice. And Vega posted, unfortunately, the astronauts for Artemis 3 are all male. NASA Administrator Jared Isaacman said, Our last astronaut candidate class was greater than 50% female, so why aren't crewed missions also greater than 50% female? They are, dumbass! The ISS has had several all-female command crews, and their crews have always been at least 50% female. If you've got evidence that a qualified female astronaut was unfairly passed over, then present it. Otherwise, what do you think you're actually saying when you make comments like these? You think you're being all feminist and a champion of women's rights? Or do you think you're sending the message that you don't think women are the equals of men on a level playing field? I want to tell you about the eyeglasses I've been wearing for years. As people can see on my videos, I have a very strong prescription, which makes glasses more expensive, especially when I need computer glasses, reading glasses, prescription sunglasses, and most expensively, progressive lenses for general everyday wear. To save money while still getting quality glasses, I get them from Firmoo. In fact, I just got a pair of progressives with high-index aspherical lenses and a nice pair of frames my wife loves for just over $100. It would have been $500 to get them through my eye doctor. Not only do they look good, the glasses are durable. I've worn many pairs for several years without problems. All orders come with a 30-day return policy, a 3-month warranty, and one-on-one customer service. Go to Firmoo, that's FIRMOO.Bogosity.tv anytime you need quality glasses at a low price. Once again, that's Firmoo.Bogosity.tv. And now it's time to sentimentalize this week's biggest Bogon emitter. I always hate to give this to a company I like and have defended a lot in the past, especially since I know this isn't entirely their fault, although it kind of is. I'm talking about Anthropic, the makers of Claude AI, and specifically about their new Fable 5 model. Part of their Mythos 5 system, Fable 5 is the most demanding reasoning and long-horizon agentic AI. Anthropic makes bold claims about Fable 5, exceeding those of any previous Anthropic model and topping all of the tested benchmarks. That is, if you can get it to respond. The Mythos series is so incredibly capable, especially when it comes to things like coding and cybersecurity research, that Anthropic really stepped up the guardrails. So much so that it's refusing to answer even completely harmless questions. That includes questions about issues in cancer research to so much as reading a cybersecurity blog. It's not so much the extreme guardrails themselves, though, but how invisible they are. Instead of just refusing or rerouting requests, it'd just give a dumber answer with no indication why. One journalist simply asked, "What is a protein?" and the model was automatically downgraded. It thought the journalist was going to build a bioweapon. Another user encountered the safeguards just for saying, quote, "Hello!" It doesn't even fall back to a different model. According to Anthropic, quote, "Instead, the safeguards will limit effectiveness through methods such as prompt modification, steering vectors, or parameter-efficient fine-tuning." Security researcher Dean W. Ball said, quote, "Degrading performance on ML research without telling the user is shockingly hostile and a terrible look. That could silently damage all sorts of work, including some of my own. Also, the type of thing that could raise the eyebrows of antitrust enforcers worldwide." Alpha Ziv wrote on X, "Not only do they get to decide what you use LLMs for in research, but this also enables them to silently intervene in your research without you knowing. This sets a dangerous precedent. If a model refuses openly, users can understand the boundary. If a model falls back to another model, users can still evaluate the difference. But if a model silently modifies or weakens its own answers while still pretending to help, researchers lose the ability to know whether a failed result came from their own idea, their implementation, or an invisible intervention by the model provider. That is not safety. Safety policies should be transparent, auditable, and user visible. On top of that, The people most harmed by this are not the largest labs with massive teams and proprietary infrastructure. It is the independent researchers, academic groups, startups, and open source builders who rely on public tools to compete, innovate, and pioneer AI for everyone else. Clement DeLange, co-founder and CEO of Hugging Face, wrote on X, Anthropic is a company that has been raising awareness about AI manipulation, which is a very important topic. You don't want to go down as the first company to enable and open the door for human-designed AI manipulation at scale. Giving intentionally bad answers to users without them knowing is the highest form of manipulation in my opinion. One way to avoid that is just at the very least to always keep disclosing the limitations and safeguards. More generally, I want to emphasize that there are millions of AI builders out there using your tools for good every single day. And the more you can keep helping them, the better for the world. Thank you. It's not too late to fix this. Not a good look mere days after filing your IPO. Anthropic is backtracking on this, but the lesson needs to be learned. These so-called guardrails don't work any better than porn filters. If anything, AI safety filters are much harder than basic porn filters. The bad and good requests can be nearly identical. How do pathogens spread is the same sentence whether you're a middle schooler working on a biology essay or someone with worse intentions. There's no keyword to ban. It's all based on vibes. The false positive rate is insane. A porn filter can at least somewhat reliably distinguish its targets, explain how proteins work versus help me weaponize this protein requires actual understanding of intent, which is exactly what these classifiers are bad at. And the fact is, we really need to get back to the concept of personal responsibility. If someone uses a product to do a bad thing, that person is responsible, not the company who made the product. And it's really bad if the good actors stop trusting the tool. That's what Anthropic didn't understand. It's especially not a good look right after explaining why lowering their guardrails for the military is a bad idea, even though it's still an incredibly bad idea. Now, what follows is a last-minute addition. I wrote this just before recording when it was too late to change anything, but I wanted you to know that now the Trump administration has put an export control on Fable 5 and Mythos 5, prohibiting its use by any foreign national, whether inside or outside the U.S. Which means Anthropic has now had to disable those models for everyone. There was no other way to comply. So as I said earlier in the portion of this I wrote during podcast prep, I understand the constraints they're under, and if this had happened a few hours earlier, I'd probably have this segment be against the Trump administration instead of Anthropic. But you know what? Let the segment stand, because the use of guardrails fails and fails again. And at some point, people need to pay attention to the cautionary tale it tells. The government took this action against Anthropic despite guardrails being turned up to laughable proportions. Guardrails won't do what you want, and they won't please the people you want to please. Far greater than the backlash from the cybersecurity world, who thought the guardrails went too far, is the action from an authoritarian government who will never think you've gone far enough. They've got a lot of trust to build back up. So all of that makes Anthropic this week's biggest Bogon emitter. And now let's pseudo-discombobulato reverberatize this week's
Idiot Extraordinaire!
How many religions are there? According to the Pentagon, there were 200. If that sounds low, well, it just got worse. They pared the total religions down to just 31. Troops just have these 31 to choose from now if they want recognition of their faith from chaplains. Troops can no longer identify as Unitarian Universalists, pagans, Wiccans, and even atheists. There are no atheists in foxholes, because we just define them away. The list makes broad categories of Christian traditions such as Baptist, Presbyterian, or Methodist without allowing denominations within those systems to be specified. So no Northern Fundamentalist Baptist Great Lakes Region Council of 1879. You can still choose no religion or agnostic. There's also an other category, always useful. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth has worked to infuse evangelical Christianity into the official workings of the Pentagon, and this is just another step in that direction. Baptist minister Paul Rauschenbusch said, quote, Secretary Hegseth is not streamlining anything. He is elevating one narrow religious worldview from the top of the chain of command. The First Amendment does not allow the government to create a hierarchy of faiths, and it certainly does not allow the Pentagon to decide which beliefs are worthy of recognition. Marine Corps veteran Irene Glass, who identifies as pagan, said, quote, As a member of a minority religion, I think it's really important that we be counted. It erases us, and so many of us have served so proudly, so well, and so honorably. Oh, you can also no longer choose Native American religions. A former Army chaplain said, quote, When I raised my hand to become an Army chaplain, I swore that I would support and defend the Constitution. The First Amendment is the free exercise of religion for everybody. That's what I was buying into. That's a tragedy and travesty, absolutely. As far as I'm concerned, that's a violation of the United States Constitution. No more druids, no more asatruar, no more shamans, no more deists, no more humanists, no more spiritualists. Arguably the most controversial change involves the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. You can still choose that as your religion, but they're no longer considered to be Christian. Senator Mike Lee wrote on X, Can anyone tell me why the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints was left out of the list of Christian churches? Yeah, I can help you with that, Mikey. It's all about identity politics. Don't think that's all over on the left side of the aisle. Evangelical Christians especially are all about trying to structure power systems in order to serve their own interests. Everyone who's not a Christian considers Mormons to be Christians. You believe Jesus Christ is the Son of God, you follow him, worship him, believe he was resurrected, all that good stuff, you're Christian. More academically, religious scholars across the board recognize Mormons as a Christian restorationist movement. Most mainline Protestants also recognize Mormons as Christians, albeit as a separate branch as they do with other Unitarian denominations. On the other hand, Catholics and Eastern Orthodox jurisdictions don't recognize them as Christian because they don't believe in the Trinity. Same with evangelical Protestant denominations, including Lutheran, Reformed, Presbyterian, Baptist, Pentecostal, and Anglican groups, who generally regard Mormons as apostates. MAGA has gotten in bed with the evangelicals, and in that bed, MAGA Mormons must sleep. You've been told for years that evangelicals don't want you. You've been told for years that evangelicals will just use you to help get their power structure the way they want, at which point they'll cast you aside. Time will tell if there are enough Mormons in the government to bend Trump's ear and get him to change course on this. But if that happens, it'll just be because he thinks Mormons are still useful to him. The only objective viewpoint, at least as objective as you can be with something like this, when you look at definitions in history and scholarship and culture, Mormonism is overwhelmingly categorized as Christian. Not that Hegseth cares, because he'll put his dogma over his oath of office every time. At least we atheists had no delusions about where we stand, but this should be a wake-up call for Mormons. It just remains to see how much they can make the Trump administration care. So all of that makes Pete Hegseth and the Pentagon this week's
Idiot Extraordinaire!
Well, that wraps up this free to pursue a life of religious fulfillment edition of the Bogosity podcast. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please go to donate.bogosity.tv for several ways to support, and discord.bogosity.tv to join the discussion. Subscribe at the Discord, Patreon, or Subscribestar, and you can listen early and ad-free. Thank you for listening. Until next time, here's a quote from Albert Einstein. Never do anything against conscience, even if the state demands it. The Bogosity podcast is licensed under Creative Commons Attribution Non-Commercial No Derivatives 4.0 International License.
Bogosity.